No, Cookie. Trump's tariffs are not affecting the price of your dog food yet. Oh, hey everybody. Welcome back to J-L's Book Club, where we don't talk about Fight Club because I didn't read Fight Club. You're probably saying, but J-L, where was my February book review show? Well, I read 2 very long books in February, and thanks Black History Month, 3 fewer days in the month to get you a review. I don't know what that says about Black History Month, but it's pretty anti-book if you ask me. But anyway, here I am. This month you're going to get 2 episodes. So here's your February episode, a few days late. 2 books read, okay? Now, obviously, big fan of Donald Trump, okay? Greatest president ever. But if you were to construct a sort of holy trinity of the Republican Party, some might have Teddy Roosevelt, but others would probably have Lincoln. Obviously, Lincoln's on everybody's first team all-Republican, maybe not this current iteration of the Republican Party, and Ronald Reagan. And I thought, what better way to celebrate the month where we honor the presidents than by reading 2 biographies of 2 presidents, Lincoln and Reagan. Now, the Reagan book by Max Boot made the top 10 of the New York Times in 2024. 725 detailed pages about Ronald Reagan. And then the other book is a fan recommendation. I was supposed to do it a year ago, couldn't get to it. Little nepotiz. That's just a School of Rock quote. Let me interpret. My tone was like Jack Black in School of Rock. Anyway, whatever. But it was recommended by a great fan. Shout out Broovies Cinema Pub in Salt Lake City, Utah. Aaron Peterson. Lincoln on the Verge. Okay? Now we're going to start with Lincoln on the Verge. We're going to go chronologically. I'm going to say Aaron is a great fan and a great guy, as far as I can tell. Don't have some Netflix documentary come out 20 years from now and let me find out you're not a great guy. But like any book, like any recommendation from somebody that isn't me, I immediately go, please don't let it suck, because I want to keep thinking highly of this person. Let me tell you something. Lincoln on the Verge. It's pretty fucking awesome. Hey, how about that? You like that, Aaron? You're probably a little nervous there in Utah, going, oh man, I hope I didn't make JL waste weeks of his life reading this. No. Lincoln on the Verge by Ted Widmer. Okay? I really enjoyed it. To the point where I'm reading it going, not only is this an enjoyable read and a very unique, it's basically, just to sum it up, it's Lincoln on the Verge, 13 days to Washington. So the idea is Lincoln has been elected, and he's got to go from, I think he was west of Illinois in the beginning. He might have been in Kansas, and he's got to get to Washington, D.C. to get sworn in because the Civil War is already kind of starting. And it's this tailor-made for a Netflix series or a movie. But do I think, if I were to say, are there any flaws with the book? I'm not going to say it's repetitive, but it's almost like he was like, his editor said, I need 450 pages, Ted. He goes, I've got 270. And it's pretty lean and tight. It's a real, like, interesting new angle, like almost an adventure action thriller with Abe Lincoln. We're going to need 450 pages so we can charge more. And then he was just, I'll throw in every amount of historical detail surrounding everything Abe Lincoln does, sees, and visits in the book. Now, did I not like that? No, it was fine. I felt like Lincoln, like J-L on the Verge, because I was trying to, I read on my trip to and from Charlotte about 300 of the 450 pages on those 2 train rides. But since it's Lincoln on the train, I felt part of history. And I'm not, right now, folks, Abe Lincoln, what was so cool about this, and I don't know if Aaron picked up on this while he was reading it or recommending it, but I have taken the train, obviously, a lot in this country. But Lincoln was on the Lakeshore Limited. It wasn't called the Lakeshore Limited, but he was hitting all the stops I've hit on my travels throughout this country. Is that enough for me to run for president? I don't know. You know, I'm following the footsteps of a locomotive giant, Abe Lincoln. But I'm reading about all these stops. I go, Rochester's. He's like, what's next? Yeah, I know it's after Rochester. Buffalo, Rochester. Syracuse. You know, he's hitting all the stops on the Lakeshore Limited on his way to New York. And it was, as a guy who likes the train, as a guy who likes history, as a guy who likes politics, it really was like, Aaron couldn't have recommended kind of a better history book for me. Like it was, and I recommend it. It was a really enjoyable read. Could have done with 500 less references to people calling Abe Lincoln ugly. We may think our politicians are mean now. This dude got called ugly by everyone. Every quote from rallies was, "He's quite an ugly man, but I feel his presence and his goodness." He wasn't as ugly as they said. I mean, he's not good looking, but he wasn't as ugly as I thought. This ugly ape man of a president, if I was going to make a joke about how many times they reference him being called ugly in this book, it's over 100, I think. And that's not a joke. I think there are 100 references, give or take 5, to people calling him or referring to him as homely, ugly, disgusting. It was like, God damn, Abe, this is how we treat us. Like, it made me sad because obviously Lincoln gets assassinated. We all know the end. I hope we know the end of the story. Not this story, but the end of Lincoln's life. But I was like, this dude, I mean, it is... I haven't read a lot of Lincoln biographies, just to be clear. I have Doris Kearns Goodwin, Team of Rivals on my shelf. But this was such an interesting look at him as this kind of citizen rising to this moment, this never before, never since moment as U.S. president, and paying the ultimate sacrifice. But it's like, but the way this book is told, I can't believe there isn't a Netflix series or an Apple series or a movie. I mean that. Like, it's such an interesting slice of history that Ted Widmer wrote up. I expected to just kind of give Aaron like oh yeah, dude, it was a nice book, like pretty good, like thanks, like didn't suck, thanks for the recommendation. It's a really good book, but like there must be a million. There's like a Lincoln History Book Prize every year. That's how many books get written about Lincoln. So to find this angle, and like I said, it's not without complaints. Could it have been a 300-page book instead of 450? Sure, I think so. But I'm going to read 2 passages, but you get, I mean, I actually got a little sad towards the end of the book, and I'll read the passage that made me a little sad, but you're just like, this is no BS about the modern Republican Party. This is a great man. You're reading about, like, this is why he's the GOAT, I guess, because he was just this weary figure who took the presidency at its most dangerous time for the history of the country and pulled the country through. But this book humanizes him. There's so many details about how people would just look at him and he looked so burdened emotionally, like he was, versus our current president. Just think in contrast that the weight of this was really like crushing him. And I really just kudos to Aaron, and I do recommend it, folks. But I'm going to read 2 quick passages, and they don't include, I believe there's no reference to him being ugly in them, but every other page there seems to be a reference to, like, this homely, awkward, ugly son of a gun. There's a great passage, just a little snippet. Compare it to our modern politics. To the crowd's amusement, this is when he's in Pennsylvania, I believe, or Ohio. He's traveling, the J-L route. To the crowd's amusement, like my train story would be J-L, 3 days to California. Chapter 2, it stinks of shit. Chapter 4, why aren't they wearing shoes? Chapter 7, that person just got on the train and they took a shit in the bathroom? What the hell? Shit at home. Chapter 10, shoulder pain. Why am I doing this to go to Chicago for a gig? Chapter 12, arrival. Nobody bought tickets. J-L on the Verge. Okay, so here's a passage. He's in Ohio or Pennsylvania. To the crowd's amusement, he began to engage. This is somebody who got on stage. Not great security at the time. To the crowd's amusement, he began to engage Lincoln in a very public conversation, saying, "God bless ye, Mr. Lincoln. I didn't vote for ye, sure, but I wish ye luck, and I want to shake your hand." A hearty shake followed, after which Lincoln asked how he had voted. For Douglas came the answer, Stephen Douglas, after which Lincoln asked, for Douglas came the answer while the crowd roared. Lincoln then asked him to keep the ship together and write on her course for 4 years. Lincoln then asked him to keep the ship together and write on her course for 4 years so that Douglas would have another chance and to keep the good ship from being broken up. I just thought that was such an interesting thing that he was saying, even after he just won an election. He's like, well, help me keep the Union together, sir, and you can vote me out in 4 years. You can vote for Douglas again in 4 years. Compare that to our current president. Just the contrast couldn't be stronger. Okay, so that was one passage. I just thought of that in terms of like what it said. Like, and to be honest, yes, I could see somebody like Joe Biden making a reference like that. You're like, hey man, we'll keep it. Don't do a civil war, Jack, and maybe you vote for Trump in 2028. Okay. Now, this is later in the book when Lincoln has learned of a plot in Baltimore to murder him on the train. Okay? Like, and we're talking like 1,000 people charging the train to murder him. Kind of scary, I think. I get nervous when I just see 50 people on the platform and go, oh shit, is somebody going to sit next to me? Imagine rolling into town and it's like, there's 1,000 racists who want to shoot and stab you. And the local government is all in on it. That would be a bad Amtrak trip. And I've been on some bad ones. Then a bold, so he has found out he is, there's a plot to kill him in Baltimore. Then a bold personal statement. I have never had a feeling politically that did not spring from the sentiments embodied in the Declaration of Independence. It brought the house down. His next few sentences remembered the dangers that the founders exposed themselves to, in a way that suggests he was mentally girding himself for the next 24 hours. But Lincoln kept returning to the great principle or idea that kept the Confederacy so long together, reappropriating the word for the United States of America. Then he explained the great idea more succinctly than the day before. It was, and during this speech, he's making an argument for, the Declaration of Independence means equality for everybody, regardless of whether Thomas Jefferson was a slave-owning racist. Then he explained the great idea more succinctly than the day before. It was not the mere matter of separation from England, but the creation of something more rarefied, a nation devoted to liberty for all. Something in the Declaration gave hope to the world for all future time. The transcript recorded great applause. He hammered some more on the ingot, finding the word all again twice. The weights should be lifted from the shoulders of all men. All should have an equal chance. The speech had already done everything that anyone might have asked, but then Lincoln offered a stunning conclusion. He declared that he would be one of the happiest men in the world if the country could be saved with its great idea intact, but added that he would rather be assassinated on this spot than to surrender it. It was not the first time Lincoln had visualized his own death, but it was powerfully real given what he had learned the night before concerning the threats against his life. It's like, that was a moment where you're just like, good, like, I get it if you have to rename a school, because Lincoln might have not been perfect. Okay, California. But no, it's a great book. It's such a unique angle he found and a unique story. I think that alone is such an impressive act of historical creativity. But I really liked it. I mean, it was, and for me, all the train stuff, like, it wasn't just, oh, he's riding trains. It's like, I know that stop. And it's kind of cool to be like, yeah, the person next to me smells like a used diaper. But I'm on the train that I'm on the tracks that took Abe Lincoln to inauguration. That's a cool thing, And maybe one day I'll just do a web series and get like 18 views per video. And I'm like, I am following Abe Lincoln's boo, do Trump. Anyway, that's your first book. The next book, well, there I go again. The Reagan by Max Boot, who talks like this. I do have a moderate Max Boot impression. Reagan, His Life and Legend. Now, this was a very enjoyable book to read, and I'm going to say something for my longtime fans, and we got to have Ron Reagan Jr. make a quick appearance. Not afraid of shitting on my parents. I used to have a Ron Reagan Jr. show up, not literally, just me doing an impression, from his atheism commercials that used to run all the time. Not afraid, Ron Reagan Jr., not afraid of burning in hell. And I actually, after doing the impression many times on my podcast, there was a new batch of commercials, and he was like, Ron Reagan, not afraid of burning in hell. And I said, he's lowered the smugness. He's like, I don't want to be Bill Maher. That guy J-L keeps mocking me on his podcast with 600 listeners. So then I watched the Reagans on Showtime, and I loved it because the series could have been called Ron Reagan Jr. Shits on His Parents for 4 hours. All I'm going to say is reading this book, it's clear Ron Reagan Jr. had the best relationship of the 4 kids that Ronald Reagan fathered. And I was like, holy shit! It's a very good book. And the thing is, I knew I was going to get it when I was reading a review on Barnes & Noble. I wanted to get, and then it was a gift from my cinematographer's sister for Christmas. But I was going to get it because I'd heard it was good. Then the New York Times put it on their top 10 list. So obviously being an elitist snob, I was like, well, now I definitely have to read it. And then, Beverage of the Month! Sorry, Reagan. Beverage of the Month! What the hell? We have sponsors. Guys, the Beverage of the Month. It's Prosecco, and I think I've done a Prosecco before, but this one's special. Now, act surprised, like you had no idea this was coming. Will you be my bridesmaid? My cinematographer is going to be a bridesmaid in a wedding in Canada. And so this technically counts as a new beverage. So we're still not repeating a beverage. So it's La Marca Prosecco, bridesmaid edition. Jeez. You know, the sponsors pay money and then you don't do the Beverage of the Month. I'm sorry. I'll probably have to give them a discount. But when I read the Barnes & Noble reviews of this, there was one review. And the person gave it like 1 star. It was early when the book had just come out. And they said, this book is too woken. And I was like, you can't even write woke? Because I guess they had heard that it was an honest appraisal of Reagan. What I found amazing reading this book, very readable, very enjoyable, immensely critical of Reagan. And Max Boot is like a former Republican turned like never Trump independent. But it's relentlessly critical. It points out his strengths as an individual, his individual morality conflicting with his sort of public ignoring of groups of people. Like, hey, I helped out this black guy who needed help, but as a group, fuck him. That kind of thing. You know, like I'm exaggerating only slightly, but it was just he had this tremendous life, obviously, from radio to acting to politics. But Max Boot is really like relentlessly critical, and I don't mean relentlessly like, oh, give it a break. I just mean like he doesn't ignore any strengths or any weaknesses. And the parallel between him and Trump is so unbelievably clear. It's so clear that Trump, and spare me like the Reagan was the worst. I get it. No, he's not. Trump is the worst. Trump is Reagan without the positivity, the hopefulness, even as a messenger, the communication skills. Like Trump has communication skills because he's speaking to an awful generation of Americans. He basically grunts, picks his ass, and burps. And it's like, but that's how people like to communicate these days. Reagan could actually communicate in the classical sense. And whether or not his politics were not always good, or his policies were not good for the mass of American people, he at least even projected a positivity that you could understand why somebody would be inspired by Reagan. Only a hateful generation of Americans could be inspired by Trump. Only people who are self-serving and angry could find Trump's messaging good. But I really, really liked the book. I really did find it funny that Ron Reagan Jr. was like the positive one in the book of the 4 kids. And Nancy Reagan definitely seemed like a turd. I'll be respectful and not use any worse words. A real see you next Thursday sometimes. But it's a really good book. It's a hefty book, but I'd be lying if I said these weren't two really strong books about, major historical figures. So I'm trying to think if I had something else I wanted to say specifically. No, well, but here's an example. But I mean, just from Make America Great Again to... Oh, and I will say this. I didn't write a succinct summary of Ronald Reagan, like pre-politics, but it was pretty interesting that he was somebody with a very good memory, who feared flying, had good old school values. There were like 5 similarities. Like I was like, until the age of like 35, I think I was on the Ronald Reagan path. So between Lincoln taking the trains and Ronald Reagan being like me until the age of 30, I mean, I basically think I'm going to be a president one day. It's pretty cool. But okay, here's a passage that I just thought was funny because Trump is so the bad version of Reagan. I mean it, like not just bad morally, like, or the worst version. Tip of the hat to my progressive fans who'll be like, Reagan is the reason we're in this. Trump is an aberration of the highest order. Like, I'm sorry, even if you think Reagan was the worst, he's still way better than Trump, both morally and as a president. Sorry, like it's just, whether you think that's a 10 out of 100 being better than a 0 out of 100, so be it. But he's much better. And Cookie's snoring, so I hope you guys aren't bored with this review. Thanks, Cooks Bear. And you're snoring loudly. Jeez, rude. Anyway, talking about presidents here. I know it's not your president, you Kentucky, Tennessee girl. I'm sure you love Trump, but these were statesmen, and you're still snoring. Anyway, I'm actually talking to you. Hey, pop up. Hey, pop up, you're snoring. Thank you, girl. Hey, good girl. Anyway, guys, from Make America Great Again, stealing that, I can't tell you how many parallels. And Boot does not, like, draw them out. He doesn't, like, say, just like Trump, just like Trump. You're just like, Trump is the shittier, worse, meaner, garbage version of Reagan. Plain and simple. And we're a more garbage people. That's why we have 2 terms of Trump. Reagan would be a soy boy rhino cuck if he were in the Republican Party today. He'd be on CNN. He'd be like a funnier, like more likable John Kasich at this point in this Republican Party. But here's a passage, just another similarity, because him and Trump were both shot. Okay? This is when he's been rushed to the hospital. His blood pressure was rapidly dropping. His pulse was faint. He was going into shock. Many of the medical personnel present did not expect him to survive. Am I dying? The president asked one of the physicians who first reached him. I can't breathe. My chest hurts. The medical personnel cut off the president's new suit and found a small slit below his left armpit where Hinckley's 5th bullet had penetrated. There was no exit wound, which meant the bullet was still inside. He had a collapsed lung and a chest cavity filling with blood. One of the surgeons inserted a tube into his chest to relieve some of the pressure and started a blood transfusion. Feeling momentarily better, Reagan spotted Jerry Parr from his gurney and said through his oxygen mask, I hope these guys are Republicans, meaning the doctors. Wow. Fuck, tear down this wall. That's the best line of Reagan's presidency. Now, what did Trump do? He got nicked in the ear and got up with an adrenaline rush and went, fight! Fight! And his Secret Service allowed him to pose for a photo op while there was an active gunman and he was exposed. I'm not saying it's a conspiracy. I think it would be too hard for that to have been a conspiracy. I'm just saying, fight, fight, or I hope these guys are Republicans. Which is a better line under fire? Which is a better line when facing your mortality? Reagan, greater symbol than Trump, in a landslide. So both books I recommend. Lincoln on the Verge, if you want to, maybe Aaron gets a nickel every time they sell copies. I don't know if he has a deal with the publisher, but that's a paperback, so that's obviously going to be the cheaper and lighter read. But they were both really good. I'm sorry, and I know, don't spare me comments, and I'm not speaking about most of you, but spare me comments about Reagan was, but I'm just telling you, the books are really good. And you know my politics probably, so you know I'm not here going like, yes, finally, a rehabilitation effort for the Republican Party. No, they're very good boots, and Boot spares no criticism. And Abe Lincoln was apparently the ugliest man to ever walk the earth in 1860. I don't know if this makes me a better person, that I'm an like, I don't know how I would identify in terms of my sexual preferences, in terms of, like, you know how people say, I'm a sapiosexual. Dane Cook once said that on Instagram, meaning I'm attracted to intelligence. Sure, Dane. But am I an emancipation-sexology? Basically, emancipation and sex, combine that into a word. Because I never looked at Lincoln as horrifically ugly, because I was too in awe of, like, that's Lincoln. That's Lincoln. He can't be too ugly. He's Abe Lincoln. Of course, you got to have, like, a glowing... But back then, they were like, I don't know what this motherfucker's going to do. He might be a shit president, and he's ugly. But I guess if they looked at him 30 years later, they were like, not a bad-looking man, because his goodness radiated through his caveman-like features. Basically, he was unfrozen caveman lawyer, is how they portray him in terms of how he looks. But you know what? He was Republican Bay to me. So that's it for this month's books. 2 great books, 1 great president, 1 great communicator. Next month's books. Oh yeah, and please, can you show the picture? Our cinematographer once got a picture when she was a little girl with Ronald Reagan's wax statue. And just so you guys don't get creeped out, that picture was taken 5 years ago. So, nothing untoward going on. I'm kidding. That picture was taken, 68 years ago? No, it was taken like 30-something years ago. Anywho, J.L.'s book club's in trouble. Next month, 2 books. I was unsure what the second book was going to be, but Reboot, a novel. This made the New York Times Top 100. It's a comedy about a guy rebooting a show, and I think it's kind of a satire of modern Hollywood, so I'm here for it. And the other book, because I have to return it to my ma'am, okay, she lent it to me. Not lent it to me, she was just trying to get rid of books. And it's David Grann's #1 bestseller, The Wager, which is now on paperback, but she lent it to me and I want to read it so I can give it back to her and clear up some space. We've purchased new bookshelves in here. Guys, you talk about J.L.'s book club. My Valentine's Day gift was a bookshelf. And I don't say that mockingly. I asked for a bookshelf because I'm a learned man with many tomes. And promises made, promises kept. There's a new bookshelf here to fill up with more books. But one of them won't be this one because this belongs to my mom. So I'm going to read this book. And he wrote Killers of the Flower Moon, which was awesome. Movie, very long. I found it boring, but the book is an A+. So these are your 2 books. You'll get these before I leave for my long train trip, my Lincoln-esque train trip across the country at the end of the month. So yeah, look forward to that. Thank you for being Patreon subscribers. And if you're seeing this 4 or 5 months from now, Jesus Christ, join the Patreon, okay? So that's it. That's this month's episode. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. And remember, books. They're like documentaries for smart people.